This is From Maine with Love, an Allagash Brewing podcast where we talk about beer, our community here in Maine, and things that generally make us happy. My name is Brett. I work on the marketing team over here at Allagash, and with me I have Liz Wilson.
Hey, everybody.
She's our marketing manager, and Patrick Chavanelle, an R&D technical brewer here at Allagash.
Howdy.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So Patrick, we're going to talk about our pilot beer program in specific and innovation kind of at Allagash in general. But I wanted to start with talking with you about something that I know you're interested in, which is fermentation. Have you you talked about making different fermented things at home. Are you making anything interesting at this point in time?
You said the word interested, and it's not really I'm interested in fermentation. It's more that fermentation is a complete and total obsession. So just to clarify.
Thank you.
Right now, I have two kids at home, two young kids, so it's kind of hard to do anything really. But in terms of fermenting, this, when it starts to get cold out, it's kind of the start of bread season for me. So I bake a loaf of bread every week, and I always do it with a natural sourdough starter. So if you can count that as a fermentation, that's kind of all I have going on 100%. Right now. But it's something.
Dude, at the beginning of the pandemic, I tried to make a sourdough starter, and it failed utterly miserably. And for some reason, I just started making another one. So
you'll get it eventually.
Very eventually.
My husband has gone on many adventures of making sourdough starters, so much so that I've had to carry them on the subway in New York to make sure I was taking care of it and it was not left unattended.
Awesome.
So I have a mild disdain for sourdough starters.
I'm a masochist because I'm not good at them, but I want to do them anyway. So to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about, Patrick, could you just tell us kind of what is a pilot beer program in general? I mean, you could say what is our pilot beer program, but I'm just kind of interested in your take on what kind of a pilot beer program should be.
All right. Yeah, this is a pretty big question that might be hard to generalize, but I'll do my best. A pilot beer program, I guess, is a program for new beer development for breweries in general. Typically, they're done on the smaller side, and by smaller, I just mean volume wise. It's kind of the first step to new beer innovation. So generally, you'd start with a concept of some sort that you want to work on, formulate a recipe around that concept, brew the beer on your small system, analyze it, either rebrew or then take the next step in terms of figuring out how best to scale it up for a larger batch size. So I know that, not all breweries have the capability of having a small system to do these sort of things on. So we're kind of lucky there for a number of reasons, that being one of them. But, in terms of how it's done here, I think it's one of the coolest things that we do as a brewery. There are plenty of breweries that have a system that's similar to the one that we use, but the fact that we're as big as we are and we fully rely on the ideas that come in from every employee in order to generate the new beer ideas for beers that we're eventually going to sell on a larger scale, it's pretty special.
Yeah.
The way we go about it here is, to my knowledge, unlike anywhere else.
Do you recall how long we've been running our pilot program? Has it basically been our entire existence?
That's a good question. I want to just throw out a number and say 15 years maybe, right. But it has changed so much over the course of that time. I've been here 11 years. as an employee at Allagash. And I think within the first 6 months, maybe a little later, I started on the pilot team. And back then, there were 4 of us, I think. And, it was much different. We'd have we would meet maybe once a month, and meetings were just kind of sitting at a table, and they weren't organized by any means. And our system for accepting ideas and like getting in new ones, it was all done by paper, and like lots of paper ideas, paper ballots that we had to look at. And looking at that compared to how we are now, it's pretty incredible how the team has evolved. So yeah, it's been around for a while, but it is unlike what it started out as.
Totally. To kind of pursue that, like, what would you say are the biggest differences between then and now?
Oh man.
Less paper.
Way less paper.
Yeah.
That's about it. Next question. No. It's completely different. It's kind of hard to just pick and choose a few things.
And Patrick, who makes up the pilot team?
Right now, there's a team of 11 of us, myself included. And the, one benefit of this team is that it's not just all people within production or brewers, if you will. There are some brewers for sure, but there are also people. There's someone from the lab. There's someone from engineering. There are a few positions that are kind of just what do we call them? Basically, like floating in a sense of they can be from whatever department. We want to make sure that we have a number of people and ideas, not just from within production, but from all aspects of the brewery. The warehouse, we have a position from the warehouse. So, and the good thing and the unfortunate thing in a way too is that a number of these positions will rotate. So I say unfortunate because it's they're on basically people stay on for 2 years and then you cycle off. Sometimes we can ask you to stay on for another 2, but generally it's 2 years, you cycle off, then we can ask you back on at a later time. And the unfortunate thing is, you start to work with these people and you bring them up to speed and they're contributing, and then you have to let them go and bring somebody else on. But the huge benefit in that is that every time we bring new people onto the team, we always improve. We always either change our processes. We have new, fresh ideas coming in, and we always get better. So I think that benefit outweighs the fact that we have to say goodbye to someone for a little bit. For someone that's interested in submitting a new pilot idea, if you have a concept in mind that you want to submit, it's as simple as going on to our internal website, looking at the pilot team page, and then right on the top is submit your pilot idea. The whole intention there is to set the barrier to entry as low as possible. And so not only is it easy to navigate to, and for any new employee, that's part of the pilot orientation. We kind of walk them through this process. And clicking on the link brings you up to a form. And again, that's a super simple, easy form. It's not like someone needs to come with an idea and a recipe as well. You can just come with an idea, be inspired by something that you ate and wanting to recreate that in a beer. So the way that the form is set up is it's more so asking you, what is your general idea and concept? And the more important thing is there's a question on there that asks about what sort of flavors and aromas you're looking to achieve in the finished beer. That's the thing that, we put a ton of focus on when we review these new ideas. So I guess going back a little bit too, in terms of the question of like who can do this, it's literally anyone that works at the brewery. So going back to how like special our program is in general, the fact that anyone that works at Allagash can submit an idea, and then potentially that beer can be released as like a full scale brew at some point in the future if it's well received. And so in terms of submitting an idea, once a person goes through those steps and clicks the submit button, then all the pilot team members get an email saying like this new sheet has been populated with a new idea, and we go in and look. So the special thing is that when we do that, we are fully blind to everything outside of the answers to the questions that they submitted. So what is their general concept and what sort of flavors and aromas are they looking to achieve? We don't know who submitted it. And that was purposely done in order to remove any potential for bias. So say, as an example, Jason Perkins submits an idea. In the past, years ago, you would read the idea, obviously, but if you saw Jason's name, you're not going to give him like a 3.
Jason's our brewmaster, by the way.
3 means you don't like it.
Yeah. No, you
Oh, right. Sorry. So now it's blind to everyone. So, Rob Todd could submit an idea, and we wouldn't know it until we vote on it and look at the results, and then we do a review of who submitted it. So, again, to remove any potential for bias. And along those same lines, we have set it up so that each individual pilot team member votes. You vote from 1 to 3. So 3 is bad, 2 you're neutral. So by bad, I mean like you don't really like the concept. You don't think it's something that we should pursue. I don't want to say bad.
You're garbage.
2 is neutral, and then 1 is like you like the idea. You think it's something that we should move forward with. When each team member votes, the vote is then hidden for all the other team members. So again, it's another means of removing bias across team members, so that just using Jason as another example. So if Jason were to rank an idea 1 and then someone were to see, oh, Jason likes this idea, maybe I should vote it a 1 as well. So that's removed. So he can do whatever he wants, and then I'm going to vote the way I want to vote, without having to think about, all these other variables outside of just being able to focus on the specific idea, and that's it. So that once each team member votes, we have a weekly meeting where we'll pull up all the new ideas that have been submitted. We will reveal the results, see whether or not it was accepted. Once it's accepted, then we'll pair that idea up with a pilot team member to help them work on a recipe, and then we'll reveal whose idea it was, so they know who to reach out. And that's kind of the pathway for acceptance, if you will. Beyond that, we schedule a brew day to brew, and once it's brewed, it ferments for a period of time. I'm not sure if you want me to talk about the process of tapping and evaluating these right now.
I think we can get into that, but I just want to say, like, as a person who has submitted a pilot idea and also knows very little and next to nothing about legitimately brewing beer, like, it's really cool and empowering to see how the process works, because you work with the brewer who knows kind of like, okay, you want a caramelish flavor, let's add this much of this malt, or, oh, you want this sort of like a fruity tropical aroma, okay, let's add the hops at this point, let's add these sorts of hops. And it's not like they're just mandating anything. They're saying, like, does this sound good to you? Like, and so you really talk it out. And so there's not an aspect of like handing it off so much as it is like bringing it to life with the brewer. So very cool.
Yeah. And the other great thing too is, it's not just that you're working with one person. Every idea that comes through, it's kind of a team effort. You do work with an individual to create that recipe, but then that recipe is sent to the entire team for the team to review and give feedback on. And, it's basically every beer that goes through this system is like a full team effort outside of, the person's whose idea it is. So so it's like we're all collaborating on it in a sense.
As someone who's never submitted an idea,
Come on, why not?
I still haven't. I think about it like really frequently, and I'm like,
I'll send you the link.
Paralyzed by options. I think that's my problem. Is I'm like, oh God, what is it going to be? So I'm writing this process down. I'll submit something. But I think, when you're evaluating the beers, you put them through that sort of rating system. Are there, because I know we've released beers that have been pretty labor intensive, whether it's like a certain ingredient or something that would be hard to scale up. I guess, just more of a fun question, but are there any memorable pilot beers that were fun because of an interesting ingredient, or were particularly challenging and we're like, nope, never do that again? Or, I think that's sort of the beauty of the pilot system, is to be able to experiment with things like this. But are there any standouts over the years?
I mean, the first one that comes to mind, I can answer this question a few ways. The first one that comes to mind, and is actually part of kind of the acceptance process, is we have to ask ourselves a few questions when we are accepting new ideas. One is that, like, is this a beer or concept that we can see Allagash pursuing and brewing on a larger scale? The other is this an idea that seems feasible? So that one was added a bit earlier, a few years ago, I guess. And the example I was thinking of is we did a beer called Darling Ruby, which required us when we were piloting the beer to zest some grapefruit. When you're doing it on the scale that we are, at least to start, our pilot system is essentially 15 gallons. It's a half barrel. It doesn't seem like too much of a hassle to zest, 5 grapefruits, and then, it takes you a couple minutes and you're done. But when you think about it in terms of scaling that, and instead of doing a half barrel, you do 1,000 barrels, then it starts to become unbelievably labor intensive, to the point where you have to consider hiring temp work in order to just zest the fruit that you need to use for the beer. So yeah, we have to always kind of make sure that any new idea is practical. But having said that, we still do want some of those beers. Not all beers that are submitted are going to be beers that we make like 1,000 barrels of. And that's great. And maybe because it's fresh in my mind, because we just brewed it today, but we have one that uses koji rice as a portion of the mash. And it's this intensive, by intensive, I guess I mean like somewhat labor intensive. It's a very long brew day. So a portion of the mash is converted. So the starch is converted to fermentable sugar through the addition of koji rice that's added to a bunch of cooked grain. That sits for 8 to 10 hours. And then we kind of grain in the base beer on top of it. So just thinking about scaling that sort of concept up, that would mean that it would take nearly a day to brew one batch. And right now on our 70 barrel system, we can do 10 batches in a day, roughly. So that's clearly not a beer that we could scale, but it's a beer that's extremely interesting, that we've done a few times now and really like. And, not all beers are going to be something that we brew on our larger brew house, our 70 barrel brew house. We still want the ideas that, we could just brew one and it might take a bunch of work, but it's going to be worth it because in the end, the beer is awesome. So we kind of want both. A good blend, awesome. Mix of both.
And yeah, Patrick, I think the other thing that is interesting is talking about a few of the beers that have been scaled up and that might be recognizable to people. So one that comes to mind, I think that is one of our most used examples, is Two Lights, which goes into a pretty big distribution for us each summer. And that was a pilot idea that came in from a member of our sales team who enjoyed drinking wine, wine spritzers.
Yeah.
Wine spritzers, and so wanted to see if we could brew a beer that had the essence of that. But are there other beers that folks might recognize that have started on our pilot system?
Oh man, I mean, literally all of them do. The first one that popped into my head was Nowadays. It's a beer that we brewed last year. And it started as an idea from Jason Winchester, works in our packaging department, and it was to do a colder fermented beer of sorts. So we're a brewery that we rely heavily on yeast character for the beers that we make. I think Jason Perkins has said before, like, we're a yeast forward brewery. It's a bit weird to say, but not weird to say, but it might sound odd for someone who doesn't know exactly what that means. But we rely heavily on yeast to give the majority of the character to our beers. So what that means is we generally have to, use a Belgian strain and ferment warm. When you ferment warm, you're getting what are called like esters, and esters are certain aromatic compounds that will contribute to the aroma of a beer. And his idea was to do a colder fermented beer that you wouldn't get as much yeast character, and then to add a fair amount of these noble hops, Hallertau, that lend this floral, green, grassy character. So the beer was less yeast forward, if you will, and more about like the subtleties of the yeast and fermentation. And it was more so about the hops than anything else. So that was a cool beer that, even over the course of the years that it was first brewed, which was, I don't even know, 6-7 years ago, maybe even, it was cool to see the beer develop from even like brand to brand. First, it was called Noble Blonde. And then maybe it was even brewed before that, but then it turned into Nowadays, and that beer is so good. I love that beer.
Beer's awesome. I feel like it just brings up an interesting thing that I've experienced from that I wouldn't have expected coming outside of the beer industry, and it's just that like it feels like our brewers and people generally in the brewery get so excited by beers that people outside of the brewery might not get as excited about, or like wouldn't hear and think excitement. Like I think of like Corey's Lager. Like one of our brewers brewed a really, really good, but it was a lager, it was a very balanced, excellent lager. And it was like everyone in the brewery was talking about it when it was on a pilot tap. It like went away almost immediately from that pilot tap. And it's just funny because you wouldn't necessarily think that would be the most exciting beer for people, but it was so good.
Oh, so good. Just thinking about how we capture feedback, that was more of like the old school approach in a sense, where we've gotten a bit more technical lately, but back in the day, 5+ years ago, the way we determined whether a beer was good or not was how full the keg was when we took it off tap, or the chatter about the beer throughout the brewery. So that was one of those instances where not only was it well received with the metrics that we're looking at nowadays, but it was also anything that it was all that people were talking about essentially for, I wanted to say the week that it was on, but I don't even think it lasted a week.
So for these pilot beers, I guess what's the next step? If you have a successful pilot beer, it gets good metrics inside the brewery. Like, I guess what happens next?
We've actually changed that process as recently as last year, just to ensure that, of the beers that were brewed over the past year, we want to make sure that we are considering scaling up the ones that were the most well received. So one thing that we did last year was we took a look at the list of all beers that were what we call cataloged. So if they're well received by everyone who tastes them and uses the platform that we use to gather sensory feedback called Draft Labs, we will then, during our team meetings, with whatever beers are taken off tap as a team, we'll look at that information, and then each team member has a vote as to whether or not they want to catalog a beer or kind of move on from the idea. So what we did last year is we took a list of all those beers that were cataloged, so all of the great beers that have gone through the system, and as a team we ranked them. So we did an exercise to see of all of these, what are your top 15. Once we got that information, we kind of looked at that list and sort of figured out what made the most sense in order to take the next step. So the cool thing that was really started last year is this new series that is tasting room only. And it is sort of like once a beer graduates from the pilot system, it then moves on to or it has the potential to move on to a From Maine with Love release. So those are, like I mentioned earlier, we have two brew houses. We have a 70-barrel brew house and a 30-barrel brew house. So for all From Maine with Love releases, it's just one batch on our smaller brew house that's released in our tasting room. So I can't even remember how many we did last year, maybe 13, 12?
12, I think. Yeah, we're just on 13 now.
Yeah, and the majority of those, some came from our wild facility, but the majority were from, were pilot ideas. And one of the benefits of having something like this is to be able to not just gather feedback internally, but to get a sense, because we all work at a brewery. We're all in some way, shape, or form beer geeks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just as like I spoke of before, is there's a potential bias there just across all of us, especially if I taste the beer and I'm like, oh, hey, Brett, this beer's so good. And then putting that in your ear, I'm like, oh, this beer's so good. Yeah. And then you spread it. So with the From Maine with Love series, we can kind of get a sense of, what everyone else thinks about some of the beers that were actually the way I look at it is like the cream of the crop of all the pilots go through there. And that's kind of like the first step into something potentially bigger. So when a beer is released as a From Maine with Love, we could then take a peek at how people we could then look to see how it was. Sorry, we could then have a better understanding as to what others think of a particular beer in general,
Sure.
And then use that information to consider something bigger down the road. So it's a really cool outlet in order to not just have to go from half barrel pilot to 1,000-barrel release, 1,000-barrel national release. It's kind of baby steps towards that sort of thing. It's like going into the minor leagues, if you will, before it breaks it out into either a national release or like a year-round release. Who knows?
On that little anecdote too about Corey's lager, that lager was From Maine with Love beer. It's From Maine with Love number 6 that released in 2021, and then now in 2022, that's actually it got bumped up to a national release. So it's going to be called Seconds to Summer, and it's coming out in a 12-pack of 12-ounce cans this summer.
Yeah.
So
that's not
excited.
The only one.
It's true.
Floating Holiday. So this lemon pale that we did, that was another From Maine with Love release for 2021 that we already knew that beer was good before it transitioned into From Maine with Love, but once we did, the beer's awesome. And that's now floating holiday for this year. So it's cool. And this whole progression is fairly new for us. Prior to, last year even, we didn't really have this sort of process from, like this. We didn't really have this middle area, I guess, if you will, in order to allow us to, do a smaller release of these. So it's pretty cool. And I think moving forward, it's just going to ensure that for anything that we do in a larger scale, that we're picking the best beers that we make. All the beers that go through here, all from Made with Love releases, they're awesome. All the beers that we have cataloged on the pilot scale, like, they're awesome. We already know that. But, of the ones that we decide to do on a much larger scale, like, those are beyond awesome. Those are incredibly awesome. So, and we know that because it's gone through all these steps.
Yeah. Liz, what's your favorite for Made with Love beer so far?
I love any of the wheat beers aged on fruit. Like, that is like the way to my heart. So I think for Made with Love 13 was for Made with Love 1 and 13. I think we're both wheat beer aged on fruit, different fruit. And so those are like so good.
And those are just really cool in the process because they're actually aged on second use fruit. So it's like, for Made with Love 13, to be specific about that, we have a beer coming out called Honeyberry Tumble that's aged on cherries and honeyberries, or also called Haskap berries. But we brewed that beer, aged, fermented it on those berries, and then took that beer off those berries and put a wheat beer on those second use berries. And then it kind of sours them a little bit. Is there some more like lacto kind of hanging around on the fruit, Patrick, or how does that kind of?
I mean, there's some residual beer on there, but in general, some of the fruit still has fruit character to lend. So we're able to capture that in a smaller amount. So I will say too, it's helpful because, the way we add fruit to beer, just in terms of looking at it from like a pounds per gallon perspective, we're around 2 pounds per gallon fruit to beer, which is, when you think about it, it's pretty insane.
That's a heck ton
of fruit for sure. But then when we put beer back into that tank, if we're reusing it, we don't do it at that same amount. We'll do a smaller amount, just knowing that, the amount of character that is still there is minimal to some extent. So if you put less beer in, you'll get more character when you take the beer out. So, but it's a cool thing that we're doing, a way to reuse something that would have just gone as like compost, essentially.
Totally. And that those beers specifically are the ones that Patrick was referring to when he said like most of the For Made with Love beers come through the pilot system. Those beers just happen to be like, by necessity, we have this extra fruit, we're going to use it this kind of second time to make a little more beer. That's very special and tasty.
What about you, Brett?
That Bier de Garde. I don't think I even knew what a Bier de Garde was, honestly.
So Me either.
No clue what the flavor. It's been popping up in popping up in the tasting room. Every time I see that beer, I have to get it. It inspired me to submit a Bier de Garde to the pilot system.
What was it called, Brett? Say it.
Oh, it was called. Well, it was brewed with a butternut squash, so it's called Bier de Garde. And I thought I was the cleverest person alive, and I looked it up on like Untapped, and there were like 40 other breweries that make Bier de Gardes. So it's not going to have that name. But I was honestly really pumped with how that beer came out. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. It's tasty.
Glad.
Is the color did it impart like a nice color
No,
on it too?
I think there are some darker malts in there that probably lent more towards the color than anything else.
Yeah.
One of the cool things for me was the fact that beer used a yeast strain. It's this French ale strain that we had never used before. And for me, it lent this like vinous character, this almost like grapey white wine sort of character to the beer that I've never experienced using, a strain here. So we've already done some riffs. By we, I mean pilot team. Zach Boda, who's our QC manager, he brewed a beer a few weeks ago using that strain, but a lower ABV beer. He did a grisette to see if he could get those characters just in a lower ABV beer, and then paired it with some hop varieties that are known to give off, similar characteristics like Nelson Sauvin. It's supposed to be like white wine like, and that beer's so good. It's on tap right now. Y'all should come over and try it because it's one of the best beers I think we've done so far this year.
Wow.
And that just kind of goes, that plays into what I was saying earlier about, how important yeast is to us. It's the most important thing, really. Obviously hops are important. Like I love hops. But we're really looking for yeast character for the majority of beers that we make here. So along those lines, we started, I guess if you want to call it like an R&D program a while back, which initially was just focused on just kind of stepping outside of the box of ingredients that we were generally using for most pilots that were submitted and seeing what else was out there. If you know anything about hops, there are new hop varieties coming out every year. And it's not just new hop varieties, it's experimental varieties too. It's overwhelming. And it could be challenging to get a look at all of them. So one thing that we wanted to start doing was just exploring to see, what sort of characters certain hop varieties that we hadn't used before were like in our beer. So in order to trial those, we do some small scale dry hop trials using, a specific variety. And then it'll kind of go through a similar process to our pilots where it'll be put on tap. And those beers will be, rated on a hedonic scale of how much do you like it, how little do you like it, and you're also able to comment on, what do you smell, taste, and then we get feedback that way. And initially the intention of starting a program like this was for pilot team members, to give us, other tools in our belt for helping folks create recipes. But really, what came of it was not just that, but people would submit ideas specifically around certain trials that we were doing. So they would be like, oh my God, I loved XYZ hop variety that was just on tap the other week. I want to brew a beer around this. This is what I'm hoping to achieve flavor-wise. But we also do, yeast trials, which are just as important for the same reason, to see what's out there for yeast strains and be able to integrate those in new beer ideas. So it's pretty cool that we're able to, have all these trials go through this like feedback process and to give us more options for helping folks concepts come to life, which is like literally the most satisfying thing ever. When you help someone with an idea and you see it through and, if you're able to taste it with them, like the look on their face, if you were able to help them achieve exactly what they're looking for, it's like the greatest feeling ever. So that's just on the pilot scale. Then if you're able to tell them like, oh yeah, and we're interested in doing this beer and scaling it up, like it's, that is such a cool thing to be able to, tell people. So I don't know. I love my job.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I feel like, Liz, did you have anything else that you were wondering?
No, I got to submit an idea.
For sure.
Yes. And I'm gonna put you out there a little bit, Patrick, because Patrick, I've kind of one thing to say and one thing to ask. The thing to say is that, so Patrick's actually the person behind Allagash Saison. If you were an Allagash Saison fan, you have Patrick to thank. We love that beer. And the question I have for you, Patrick, is are you like submitting pilot ideas? Do you have one on the books, or are you just doing a lot of R&D stuff?
It's a little of both. I have one that's in the fermenter right now. So we were, years ago playing around with the idea of creating a beer that had some tartness or acidity to it, but that could also be sent through our normal tanks and our normal processing equipment. When you start talking about like tart or sour beers, then you're talking about stuff like bacteria. And any beer that has bacteria, those beers are amazing, but we can't send those beers to the same equipment that we send something like white through. Just it's more challenging to ensure that you're cleaning those tanks and the centrifuge properly to ensure that there are no areas that still have whatever it might be that was in the beer, whatever bacteria, and so one kind of one I don't want to call it a project. We were basically trying to brainstorm some ideas in which we could, achieve that tartness by other means. So through, I think, some paper and also through a suggestion by our microbiologist in the lab, Mike Bion, we started looking into this yeast strain called Lachantia thermotolerans. And, nowadays there are yeast suppliers that sell this yeast. But 3-4 years ago, no one was selling it. So this is a yeast strain that ferments sugars and creates alcohol as well as lactic acid. And it's a yeast strain. It's not like a bacteria. So it's something that, if we chose to ferment a beer with it, we would then be able to send it through our normal equipment and not be concerned about any cross-contamination. So just playing around with that yeast a little more is something that I find interesting, particularly in a lower ABV beer. Once you get to around 3% or so, it's challenging to make a beer that doesn't come off as watery and thin. So my thought was, what if we boosted a beer of that sort with some acidity by means of Lachantia thermotolerans. So the beer I have that's in a tank right now, it's like a 3.5%, low ABV beer that used that yeast strain as a portion of it. And it was dry hopped a little bit. So I guess we'll see.
Sounds tasty.
You never know. But yeah, I think it's more the majority of my focus, at least lately, has been on the R&D side of things. So ensuring that we're trialing new raw materials. We also have, if you don't mind me talking just a tiny bit more, we started this program about a year and a half ago. We call it yeast bioprospecting. So what that means, it's a fancy way of saying, capturing wild yeast. And given our focus on yeast as a brewery, we thought it'd be cool to be able to try to find yeast in the wild, which, obviously with a beer like our Cool Ship beers, that happens spontaneously. So, we send hot wort outside, it cools overnight, gets inoculated with wild yeast microbes, and then it'll ferment for a year plus at our wild facility. But this program is more, a focus on one specific yeast strain. So not just like a mix culture of a number of yeast and bacteria. So what we've done so far is we've been able to isolate a strain off a wildflower that was outside the back of the brewery that gives off this aroma of exactly what you would think, these pungent flowers. Which is really cool to kind of integrate into a recipe. We also, which we haven't tapped yet, but we isolated one off a raspberry that was right outside. We have some wooden barrels and right around our tasting room that has some random raspberry plants, and We took a sample of that and put it in some medium and grew it up. And Mike Bion, our microbiologist, he was able to prop it up and isolate it. Then it gets kind of transferred to my phase, which is the R&D phase, to do some fermentations and make sure it's interesting. And he's also isolated some yeast strains from some cool ship barrels too. So pulled like single strains and then propped those strains up to see if they would give off interesting characters. So even though we've started this program over a year ago, it's still kind of in its infancy in terms of reaping the benefits of it. But eventually, who knows, we can have our deep freeze in the lab. So the deep freeze is a place that we store our yeast. That can be filled with yeast strains that were just either pulled from the air, from a flower, from wherever around the brewery, some tree bark. And we could be utilizing those strains to make pilot beers and then have it go through, the process that we just talked about. So that's awesome. It literally being, as local as possible, if you want to call it that. So that's something that
the visual I have in my head of Mike like wandering around the brewery looking on a yeast hunt is pretty incredible.
We've done 3 or 4 of them now. We literally will go find some grass or go peel off some bark from a tree or go find some rotting fruit, because if fruit is rotting, then there's a chance for there to be some yeast on there. So we've been doing it for, in the springtime and the fall, and we plan on doing it once the weather starts to warm up. So it's really cool. That's something that I'm super excited about. And I wanted to make sure I talked to you guys about it.
No, that's so cool. I feel like it was like almost an anticlimax to end on rotting fruit. But it makes great beer. Well, we'll see. We'll test
see. It might not. And then we just move on and dump it and find something else.
That's awesome. Well, Patrick, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing all this info. It's so cool to hear about and exciting to be a part of.
I mean, I get excited talking about it. I live and breathe this stuff. So I'm always more than happy to talk to anyone who's willing to listen about anything that's going on here at the brewery.
So if you have listened to this and want us to talk about anything, any questions you have, any thoughts, anything you want even us to clarify that we already kind of talked about, just shoot us a message at podcast@allagash.com. We'd love to hear any feedback or any thoughts you have.